Well, we begin by taking a look at our top story for the week ahead. The Constitutional Court, in fact, has reserved judgment in the IEC application for the postponement of the local government elections. Now, the IEC, a number of political parties and civil society organizations, of course, made presentations to the Apex Court on Friday. And as we monitor the progress on the preparations of local government elections, this ahead of the 23rd of August deadline for the election candidate list nears, we're joined via Zoom by Dr. Charles Sinkala, as an international relations consultant, and our very own SABC political reporter, Natasha Perry. Well, a very good afternoon, and thank you to the both of you for joining us. Natasha, let's begin with you. Political parties and, of course, independent candidates now have until tomorrow to submit their candidate lists of names to the IEC if they want to contest the upcoming elections. Many problems have also arisen from this. So walk us through what some of the challenges are that have arisen as a result, and how are political parties feeling about this?
Definitely, Liesl. Thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon to our viewers. Indeed, you're quite correct, Liesl. Political parties, registered political parties rather, have until the end of business tomorrow at 5 p.m. to actually submit their candidate list or nomination list for their various political parties and independent candidates as well. To date, I think 97, according to the IEC, 97 political parties have submitted their lists or nomination lists, and 353 independent candidates have also captured their nominations. But now Liesl also poses a challenge because you've got 480 political parties, remember, and some are not even done with their nomination processes. On Friday, my colleague Samgele Masego was speaking to the ANC's Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Jessie Duarte. She had indicated that the party would be handing their list tomorrow online before 5 o'clock. I spoke to the spokesperson, the national spokesperson of the EFF, Mr. Vuyani Pambo, and he had indicated that his party would also be submitting their names. I managed to speak to the president of the ATM today, Mr. Vuyolwethu Zungula, and he had said that the African Transformation Movement is, they've actually processed 75% of the list or the nomination list, and they should be done with it by the end of business today. But I mean, you mentioned something quite interesting earlier on, that this comes at a time where on Friday we saw that application by the IEC before the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court, and of course they're seeking relief to have the October polls postponed, Liesl, and of course we heard various other political parties in support and opposing those. And if I'll just probably take you through some of the arguments we had, the ANC saying that, I mean, if elections this year are not postponed, it poses challenges, especially with the internal party selection process as well. I also heard the same sentiments given by the EFF, and the EFF saying that it's parties, it's political parties, not like the DA. They don't have resources to actually hold, their regional conferences virtually. And if perhaps the elections are to go ahead on the 27th of October, then, a situation will be created where members of the EFF could actually take the party to court for not following, due process in terms of their nomination, the party's nomination process. So these political parties raising the point that it would actually cause a disruption of the party's nomination processes, which actually causes a problem. But we also heard the likes of the DA saying that the Constitutional Court has no mandate whatsoever to actually grant the relief that is sought by the IEC, especially in terms of Section 159(2) of the Constitution, which then stipulates, Liesl, that once a term of a municipal term actually expires, which is 5 years, then elections should be held within the 90-day period, which is on the 1st of November 2021.
Absolutely, Natasha. Now I want to bring Dr. Sinkala into the conversation off the back of what Natasha's just alluded to. I mean, we're looking at the summary of Friday's judgment, where judgment in fact was reserved in that IEC application to postpone the local government elections. Now, of course, despite some of the challenges that COVID-19 pandemic has presented, the Electoral Commission was also questioned on why it did not establish an inquiry at an earlier time or even approach Parliament. Now, what are your thoughts on the timelines of the work done by the IEC to date, of course, on the back of the judgment reserved on Friday?
Thank you very much, Lizzo, for having me, and good afternoon to the SABC viewers. You see, we act in reactive, in terms of the electoral processes. It's not very something unusual in the political space that the COVID pandemic has actually put things open, poor planning on the part of the government and the part of the IEC as to blame to such a problem like this, because we, like what Natasha said, the Constitution is quite clear regarding the local government. Every 5 years, there must be local government, and, this pandemic, we knew about it from last year. And I think the IEC should have been more proactive to deal with such an pandemic like this, to make ways that the elections go ahead. But again, political parties, I see also they are trying to fail to file in some candidates and some processes due to that they did not campaign or they had not time, including the ANC, who wants to postpone the elections. It's unprecedented that in the history of elections, people come up and say they are not prepared. Preparedness has to be left to the electorates. You vote and choose whom they want to be represented. It's not maybe about only a few new political parties who are participating, in terms of the elections. But most of the political parties are old political parties who have been tried and tested. So I can give an example here in Zambia, where the opposition won the elections. It was during the time of the COVID pandemic. Many of them did not actually campaign fully as expected. In fact, the outgoing President Lungu, also complained of not having enough time, but he did campaign in the name of doing the state duty. But preparedness shouldn't be an issue. South Africa has more than 200.
Well, Natasha, on the back of what Dr. Charles is saying, of course, whilst we're getting back on the line there, I wonder if you could perhaps just explain the processes that are available to us come Monday. I mean, we're looking at the lengthy processes that follow. I mean, some even alluding to the fact that only Parliament can amend a constitution. This comes after municipal terms expired after the 5-year term legally. I mean, what do these processes look like? And then also with the voters' roll closed and some of the potential litigation issues that could arise after elections happen. I mean, what are we foreseeing at this point?
Well, Liesl, it's actually a tough question that you're asking right now. And I think, the IEC is pushed in a corner, as well as the Constitutional Court. It's a situation of damned if you do and damned if you don't. You raised quite a pertinent, point there in terms of the voters' roll. And I think you're well aware, on Friday, I had an interview with the Action SA National Chairperson, Mr. Michael Beaumont, and Musi Maimane of the One Movement South Africa. And, we spoke about the issue of the voters' roll, which is a huge contentious issue. I mean, as of now, in terms of the voters' roll, the numbers that stand, I think it's around 25.7 million South Africans are on the voters' roll, which is now sealed, Liesl. And I mean, personally, in my case as well, I had no opportunity to actually change, my address, of course, as I moved, So, I think this is also a point in question where some political parties have raised the issue of the voters' roll, that yes, the voters' roll is closed, but there's so many challenges that arise out of there, whereas some people have not had the time to actually change their details on the voters' roll as well. And not so many South Africans have actually registered to vote. So, what happens, in this instance as well? Speaking on the issue of, the amendment of Section 1592, in Parliament, we heard there Justice Theron, poking holes through Advocate Vim Trengro's, arguments, who was representing the IEC, and asking questions that why did they Why did the IEC not actually go to Parliament, opt to go to Parliament instead of the Constitutional Court? Because, to actually amend a constitution, you'd need a process where you actually go to, Parliament first. And of course, 75% of those National Assembly members would actually have to vote on the issue, as well as, 6 provinces as well. But some have argued that this actually is a lengthy process as well. And, seeking relief from the Constitutional Court, in favor to actually postpone the elections was a faster route from the IEC. But I remember just, a couple of weeks back, while we were being briefed by, IEC officials, I think it was on the 4th of August, we heard the chairperson of the IEC, Mr. Glenn Mashinini, saying that those who drafted the constitution, Liesl, did not foresee a situation where, there would be COVID-19 pandemic. So, these are really unprecedented times. Although the IEC had said they are technically ready to actually hold the elections, and in terms of the electoral calendar, everything is going ahead as if, elections would be held on the 27th of October. But they can't guarantee free, fair, and safe elections, because the IEC, Chapter 9 institution, Liesl, they are, it's their constitutional mandate to actually uphold their constitution and to deliver, elections in a free, safe, and fair manner. But we can't guarantee the safeness, though, especially around this COVID-19 pandemic. We've heard arguments saying that, and submissions to the Moseneke inquiry a month back, saying that, having the elections might actually cause a super spreader events. We heard the IFP's advocate saying that it would be somewhat safe, according to scientific research or health experts' research, to have the elections held next year, as most people would have been inoculated by then. So,
now, Natasha, on the back of that, I want to bring Dr. Sinkala back into the conversation, because we also heard some opposing arguments. We've seen that COVID-19 has presented some challenges, but Justice Stephen Majid spoke about vaccine hesitancy. Mentioning that it was also a real issue in South Africa at the moment, saying that also the supply of vaccines outstripped the demand. This is people are starting to show some reluctance in getting the jab. What are your thoughts in this opposition tactic that has been thrown into the works?
Yes, it is quite unfortunate that things have turned out like this. We expected that at this time South Africa will vaccinate at least 50% of the people, but again, the recoveries as well, more than 90%, shows significant recoveries in terms of the pandemic. And that also just begs a question that why should I get vaccinated? And in fact, there's another as well problem, that those also who are vaccinated, they're getting infected. So it's a bit of a problem that government has to manage the communication, to the people, to make them understand that this is actually the reality in terms of science. And in terms of the political parties as well, it is also unnoticed that, some political parties as well, they have come out in open saying that
All right, Dr. Charles Sinkala, International Relations Consultant, and our SABC political reporter Natasha Perry, chatting about the 23rd of August deadline for the election candidate list. This, of course, as the Constitutional Court has reserved judgment in the IEC application for the postponement of the local government elections. The IEC and quite a number of other political parties and civil society organizations made presentations to the Apex Court on Friday. A very big thank you to the both of them for joining us. As South Africa waits the Constitutional Court ruling on the IEC application for this postponement of the local government elections, our international news editor, Sophie Mokoena, looked at other countries that had elections during the COVID-19 pandemic recently. Of course, more than 70 countries were forced to postpone national and subnational elections due to COVID-19.
A long queue, mainly 18 to 35-year-olds, lining up for their jab.
The attendance has been excellent. It has gone beyond our expectations. It's been such a welcome announcement for us at the vaccination site and for so many young South Africans. Yesterday, our site is not usually open on a Friday, but yesterday we opened from 2 p.m. until 8 p.m. because that's what we needed to do. We've managed to vaccinate over 2,000 people just at this site, just yesterday in those 6 hours. And today, as you can see behind us, there are cars queuing down the block. So that announcement has been very welcome, and we're very happy about it.
If the trend continues, South Africa might just achieve that herd immunity, paving the way for the return of some normality as we knew it before the pandemic, and possibly a more conducive environment to hold local government elections.
If everyone is vaccinated, I don't think they need to postpone it. If we have proper social distancing, then I don't think they need to postpone it.
I think we should postpone. Yeah.
We can only go for vote provided half of population of South Africa have vaccinated. But if they have not vaccinated, there's no way we can go for a vote.
Maybe bulwetsi bo ka ba more powerful than it is now. So now forward we go.
I would say so. Ngoba, we just need to take precautions and all that.
While South Africa's Electoral Commission has gone to the Constitutional Court asking clarity on the legality of postponing the elections, other countries didn't do so.
You said it on tape.
I did show the tape. Put it on your website.
I'll put it on.
Put it on the website. The fact of the matter is he's flat lying.
Would you rule out banning fracking?
I do rule out banning fracking because
the two presidential candidates during the elections in the United States of America last year. This at a time when the United States of America was the epicenter of the coronavirus. There were similar activities in the SADC region, with some countries choosing to go to the polls. The late Tanzanian president embarked on the campaign at a time when non-pharmaceutical interventions were not recognized or enforced in that country. In Malawi, the current president was elected during the pandemic, and later, the country experienced a surge of COVID-19 infections. President Lazarus Chakwera also launched a campaign in an effort to bring down the infection numbers. In Zambia, the World Health Organization sent a team to assist in the fight against the COVID-19 Delta variant that was ravaging the country. This did not deter Zambia from going to the polls, with a high turnout on voting day.
I'm proud of the voters of Zambia. Amen.
Sophie Mgwen, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, despite a warning from the World Health Organization, some, of course, have held elections under strict protocols and regulations to avoid the spread of the disease. Germany, in fact, is going to be holding its polls next month. South Africa continues to monitor and debate the progress of the preparations of local government elections. Well, we'll be back with more news and updates on the other side. Of course, we're joined by Mandisa Kanile. She's the director at Rise Up Against Gender-Based Violence to chat about South Africa's second pandemic. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the week ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. We continue with more news where the brutal murder of the fourth-year law student, Nosikelo Mtebeni, has shocked not only the institution, but society at large. Now, the body of the 23-year-old was found dismembered in a suitcase in East London, and the final-year law student's death has been decried by both students, the institution, and gender-based violence activists at large. Now, this all follows the announcement by Police Minister General Bheki Cele, who says over 10,000 people have been raped in South Africa between the period of April and June this year. Cele also says that many victims were raped in their homes by people they know. Of course, Cele released the quarterly crime statistics in Pretoria on Friday. The minister also went on to say that murder cases have increased when compared to the very same period of last year. Also mentioning that more than 5,000 murders were reported since April, an increase of more than 2,000 cases. Now, as we've seen, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed and exacerbated existing inequalities within South Africa. And with gender-based violence and high femicide rates, an expression of gender inequality and toxic masculinity 2020, it was officially highlighted as a second pandemic in South Africa at varying degrees of prevalence. And of course, now we require the very same effort and attention that was given to COVID-19 pandemic. But to discuss all this a little further, Mandisa Kanyile, Director at Rise Up Against Gender-Based Violence, joins us to discuss a little further. Mandisa, good afternoon and thank you for joining us. I mean, we've heard the violence against women is endemic in the world, but it has reached extreme and of crisis proportions in South Africa. I mean, we've seen South Africa as one of the highest rates of gender-based violence in the world. Obviously, in its varying forms, it infringes on basic rights set out in the Bill of Rights. We're looking at the cost, the human cost of gender-based violence. It still seems to be mounting. What does GBV and femicide rates in South Africa look like under the pandemic?
Okay, so firstly, I think there's a misconception around the fact that there has been a higher recorded rate of specifically femicide cases, etc., to this time last year. But people don't know the actual numbers. So in South Africa, even though people were locked in their homes, couldn't go to work, couldn't do the things that they would normally do and be outside and go to the tavern, etc., and do everything, we still had 7,296 sexual offenses reported in the same period. So this year's 12,702 is still high. But the fact that even under all of those restrictions, with that kind of military presence on the ground, with us being in deep lockdown, we're still able to sexually abuse women and children. So, I mean, that just speaks to us as a country. Also, I mean, some of these statistics are really scary, that in South Africa, on average, on any given year, we have 330,000 assault GBHs a year. 330,000. The entire prison population of this country is less than 150,000 people. And you're saying that every single year, on average, 330,000 people assault each other with the intent to grievously bodily harm one another. We're a very violent society. And for me, I think, one, we do not have an adequate criminal justice system that can respond to it. We do not have adequate policing to respond to it. And the fact that we're starting to see even more and more forms of extreme violence, especially highlighted within the Women's Month period. If you were to know that on the day after Women's Day, on the 10th of August, you had 10 rape cases in Lusikisiki reported alone, just in Lusikisiki. You have the body of Unoscelo found dismembered, and the perpetrator was still not even afraid enough of the criminal justice system that he was able to keep her head in her hands in his cupboard until he was apprehended. The fact that he didn't run away, that should say something to us. The fact that she was in a room and cried out for help and not one person called the police, that should say something to us about how we as a society respond around GBV in particular.
Mandisa, I'm just looking, beyond the 3 bills that have been tabled to strengthen legislation against such persons to be released into society. We've also got the GBVF's National Strategic Plan. We've got the TTT centers that have been established. I mean, when we look at some of the measures that have been implemented, what further measures are needed? I mean, last year, August 2020, Uyenene Mkhwetiana was a 19-year-old UCT student who was killed. Just a few days ago, we obviously heard about Nosicelo Mtebeni. It seems like these cases coming to the fore and the justice that ensues thereafter is not enough of a deterrent for perpetrators to stop what they're doing.
Again, we do not have adequate jail cells in this country to jail every perpetrator. So even if we had a properly functional criminal justice system that arrested perpetrators, that put them through courts, there would not be sufficient jail cells or in order to actually put them all in prison. So currently we're not in a place where we would find justice adequately through the criminal justice system. What we need to focus on is prevention. If you look at the National Strategic Plan, that is one of the focal points. The new GBV fund has said that they're going to put the bulk of its resources into focusing on prevention. Because yes, response is important. We do need to have adequate services available for survivors once they are in the system. We also, one thing that we really fail at quite badly as a country is providing proper psychosocial support and rehabilitation for perpetrators perpetrators once they have actually been identified. I mean, I say this often on different platforms that I don't understand why the survivor is the one that has to go to the shelter whilst the perpetrator stays in the home. That doesn't make sense. And during that time, that 3-month period, the perpetrator could be receiving psychosocial support, anger management training, we could be getting to the root cause of why they are violent and not reoffend. Instead, we try to use punitive measures, talk about things like the death penalty, etc., when we've seen that those measures have not worked. Also, we're not seeing consistent sentencing in terms of laws. So magistrates, for example, are not handing down the prescribed minimum sentence when it comes, for example, to rape, which is a life sentence. So if we started to see more, how can I put it? We're operating in silos in certain spaces. We're not listening to the advocacy work that is taking place. Some of the low-hanging fruits that we have that have been suggested have not seen fruition. For example, we had asked for there to be a publicized list of delinquent police stations that are not taking GBV cases seriously. We still don't have that. I do appreciate that the way that the data in the police report has come out actually says what offenses in particular are related to GBV. So even though you have arson cases, there are arson cases that are related specifically to domestic violence, robberies that are related specifically to domestic violence, saying which ones of the common assault cases and the assault GBH cases are specific towards domestic violence, where you can really start seeing the real numbers of even what goes into police stations.
Absolutely, Mandisa. I mean, this conversation continues. Quantifying the human cost as well as the economic cost is becoming too costly for South Africa and the world at large. But I want to thank you for your time. Again, Mandisa Kanyile is the director at Rise Up Against Gender-Based Violence, chatting about gender-based violence and high femicide rates in South Africa, which is a second pandemic here in the country. And all this follows the Q1 crime stats for the 2021-2022 period by Police Minister announced on Friday. That's where we're going to leave the conversation for today. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always, from myself, Liesl, Wilson, and the rest of the team. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.